The waiting room at St. Vincent Charity Hospital in Cleveland smelled like burnt coffee and antiseptic, and I'd been in the same vinyl chair for 2 hours and 40 minutes, watching a wall clock that was 7 minutes slow, holding a clear plastic bag with my reading glasses, my wallet, and a hearing aid I still hadn't put back in because my hands wouldn't cooperate. My name is Walter Doyle. I'm 68 years old. I drove a delivery route for a regional freight company out of Cleveland for 31 years before my back gave out, and 3 days ago a surgeon at this hospital went into my chest and rerouted 2 arteries that had decided to stop doing their job. The surgery itself hadn't scared me. What scared me lying in recovery the night before discharge was doing the math on who was going to pick me up. My wife Doreen passed 4 years ago. My son Marcus was the only name on the list. Marcus is 41. He installs HVAC systems for a company in Parma, and he married a woman named Rachel Voss 6 years ago. A claims adjuster, 36 years old, sharp as a tack and about as warm as a February morning in this city. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and because for 3 years I watched her work on my son the way water works on stone. Not all at once, just patient and steady, and eventually you don't recognize the shape of the thing anymore. It started small the way these things do. A dinner that got moved. A birthday that got shortened from an afternoon to an hour. Every single instance had a perfectly reasonable explanation attached to it, and if you tried to add them up out loud, you sounded like a bitter old man keeping score. Which is exactly the trap, because the moment you say something, you become the problem instead of the pattern being the problem. Marcus drove me to the hospital the morning of the surgery. He held my hand until they wheeled me back, and I remember him saying, "I've got you, Dad, don't worry about anything." And I believed him because I raised him and I knew that boy, or thought I did. When I came out of recovery, he wasn't there. Rachel's mother had fallen and needed help getting to an appointment, he said, when he finally called that evening. Understandable, explicable. The pattern doesn't care about explicable. I didn't hear from him the first day after that. Or the second. On the third day I called and he picked up on the 5th ring and he sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Sore," I said. "They're telling me discharge is tomorrow or the day after. I'll need a ride home." There was a pause on the line that told me more than anything he actually said next. "Let me talk to Rachel about the schedule," he told me. "I'll call you back." He didn't call back. Not that night. Not the next morning. On the day they actually discharged me, I tried him 4 times, and on the 4th try the phone didn't even ring. It went straight to a flat, dead silence I recognized immediately, because my grandson had done the same thing to a bill collector the year before and explained to me exactly what it sounded like when someone blocks your number. That specific nothing. My own son had put me in that box. I want to tell you what was happening on Marcus's end, because I only learned this later, and because a story that leaves out the other half isn't honest. It's just a grudge dressed up as a story. The night before my discharge, Marcus sat across from Rachel at their kitchen table on a quiet street in Parma, and she brought up something she'd clearly been sitting on for a while. "Marcus, we need to talk about your dad," she said. "Not to be cold about it, but this can't keep being our whole life." He told her it was one ride, one hospital stay, and she said that was never the truth of it, that it had been 4 years of one ride at a time since his mother died, 4 years of him being the only son of an only son with no siblings to split the weight with. And she wasn't wrong about the shape of it, even if she was wrong about what to do with that shape. "He's my father," Marcus said. "I know," Rachel said, and she said it gently, which is always more effective than saying it hard, because gentle sounds like love instead of exclusion. "And I'm not saying stop loving him. I'm saying you've turned yourself into his entire support system, and it's not good for him, and it's definitely not good for us. He needs to learn he can lean on other things. Right now he only leans on you, because you never let him find out he could stand up without you catching him first." That was the argument that got under his skin, because it wasn't about money. We've never had money trouble between us, and it wasn't cruelty on its face. It was dressed as care. It suggested that his devotion wasn't devotion at all. It was a kind of enabling, that by always showing up, he was the reason I hadn't built other supports for myself. He sat with that accusation for 3 days, turning it over, asking himself if it was true. And I understand now why he couldn't immediately reject it, because doubt is exactly the door that kind of argument is built to open. On the 4th day, Rachel didn't push. She was smarter than pushing. She mentioned, almost in passing, a coworker of hers whose father had moved into assisted living, and how much calmer the whole family had become. She mentioned a couple from her book club, who'd drawn hard boundaries with an aging parent, and how their marriage had actually improved for it. Small stones on a path, laid one at a time, until Marcus was walking somewhere he hadn't chosen to walk toward, just hadn't noticed the direction changing. That evening, she said it plainly. I think you should take a step back from your dad, just for a little while. Block his number for a week. Let him figure out his own ride home. Let him lean on the hospital's discharge people instead of you. It'll be good for both of you. And when you're ready, you can call him back on healthier terms. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand for a long time that night. He thought about the sound my voice had taken on since his mother died. A sound he had quietly started filing away as neediness, when if he'd let himself be honest, he would have called it what it actually was. Loneliness. The specific loneliness of a 68-year-old man who comes home every night to a house where his wife's slippers are still by the back door because he hasn't found it in himself to move them yet. He thought about Rachel, about 3 years of small stones, about whether the resentment she seemed sure he should be feeling toward me was actually there. And when he searched for it, he came up empty. And that emptiness bothered him more than anything. Because if the resentment wasn't his, then whose story had he been living inside? He found the story anyway by morning. The hospital has protocols, he told himself. This is temporary, this is healthy. He got up, made coffee, went to work, and did not let himself think about a plastic bag or a wall clock 7 minutes slow. He climbed inside that story and stayed there until something happened that made it impossible to keep living in it. But I didn't know any of that yet, sitting in that vinyl chair. All I knew was that my phone had gone quiet, that a cab from the hospital to my house in Old Brooklyn would run me about $18, and that I had $4 in my wallet and hands too unsteady to work the ATM in the lobby without dropping my card twice. I was 68 years old, 3 days out from open-heart surgery, and I had nowhere to go. Then I heard footsteps that weren't the soft rubber-soled shuffle of the nursing staff. Harder shoes, unhurried but deliberate. The walk of someone who has already decided to be here and isn't in any rush about it. Dr. Nathaniel Cho sat down in the chair beside me. He was still in his white coat, maybe 55, built like someone who used to run and hadn't entirely let the habit go, gray coming in heavy at his temples. He looked at the plastic bag on my lap, then at me, and he said it slow, like he was testing whether the words would hold up once they were out in the air. Mr. Doyle, were you ever on Route 90 near Ashtabula about 28 years back? A car fire? I looked at him. Something in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery went tight. Yes, I said. I remember. That was me in that car, he said. I've been trying to find the man who pulled me out for almost 30 years. I didn't know your name until 3 weeks ago, when it came up on my surgical list, and I still wasn't sure until I saw you sitting here today. My hands, which had been shaking on and off since the surgery, went completely still. You had a blue duffel bag in the back seat, I said. And a physics textbook sophomore year, he said. Ohio State. We sat with that for a second, the two of us, an old truck driver and a heart surgeon, tied together by a highway neither of us had thought about the same way since. Then he stood up and picked up my plastic bag with both hands. Careful, the way you'd carry something that belonged to somebody else and you meant to return it in good condition. You're coming home with me tonight, and you're staying as long as you need to. This isn't up for debate, I told myself. You are a grown man. You have driven 18-wheelers through Ohio blizzards. You are not going to cry in a hospital waiting room. Nathaniel, I said. Yeah, he said. Thank you. He nodded once, the way men do when they've decided the thanks doesn't need an answer, and we walked out into a gray Cleveland afternoon, and he put my plastic bag in the back seat of his car like it mattered. The drive to his house in Rocky River took about 25 minutes. He called his wife on the way. Her name is Priya. All she said was bring him home, and that was the whole conversation, like it had already been decided before he even asked. He told me about the accident on the drive, how he'd fallen asleep at the wheel his sophomore year of college, how the guardrail had torn open the fuel line, how the door had jammed, and the heat came up faster than a person can think straight in. You put your elbow through my window, he said. Most people go looking for a rock or a tire iron. You just used your elbow. It was faster, I said. That's the part I keep coming back to, he said. 28 years, and that's the detail that stayed. Priya was on the porch when we pulled in, and she came down the steps before the car had fully stopped. Thank you for saving my husband's life, she said. And I didn't have a good answer for that, so I said something like, he did most of the surviving himself, and she laughed, a real laugh, and took my arm like she'd known me for years instead of 40 seconds. Inside, there were kids' sneakers by the door, something with garlic and ginger cooking on the stove, and a gray cat named Biscuit, who came and inspected my shoes with the total lack of judgment cats reserve for people they haven't decided about yet. Priya walked me to a guest room with a quilt on the bed and towels already laid out across the hall like she'd known I was coming. "Rest," she said. "Dinner's at 7. You don't owe anybody anything until then." I slept for almost 4 hours, the best sleep I'd had since before the surgery. At dinner, their daughter, Maya, 13 and sharp-eyed, looked straight at me and said, "You pulled my dad out of a burning car?" "I did," I told her. "That's wild," she said, in the tone of a teenager for whom wild is the highest compliment on offer. Their younger boy, Eli, 11, hadn't touched his rice yet. "Were you scared?" he asked. "When you stopped." The table went quiet, waiting on my answer. "No," I said. "There wasn't time to be scared. I saw the car and I just moved. The scared part came later, when I was driving home and my hands wouldn't stop shaking." "His hands were shaking today too," Nathaniel said quietly. "When I found him." Priya set her fork down. "Walter, you're staying here as long as you need. That's not a discussion we're having." On Thursday evening, Priya put a photo up on Facebook that Eli had taken at dinner, the kind of picture an 11-year-old takes because some instinct tells him the moment is worth keeping. It showed me at the head of the table, Nathaniel and Priya on either side, the kids flanking them, Biscuit's tail visible at the edge of the frame in that eternal cat belief that proximity to food eventually pays off. Her caption read something like, "This is Walter. 28 years ago, he pulled my husband out of a burning car on Route 90 and never told a soul. Last week, my husband performed his bypass surgery and didn't know it was him until he saw the name on the chart. When Walter had no one to take him home from the hospital, Nathaniel brought him to us instead. Sometimes the world balances its own books." By Saturday, the post had been shared close to 300 times. A local news station had called Priya for a comment, and there were thousands of comments underneath, from people who'd never met any of us, but wanted to say something anyway. One of them, posted Friday afternoon, read, "Is this Walter Doyle from Old Brooklyn? I think my cousin knows this family." And I thought, sitting there reading it on Priya's phone, that's going to reach Marcus. He called Saturday morning. His number showed up on my screen unblocked, and the phone rang 4 times before I turned it face down on the table and finished my coffee. Marcus drove out to Rocky River that afternoon. I watched him from the front window, parking, standing next to his truck for a good minute looking at the house, the way you look at a door you're not sure you have the right to knock on. Dark jacket, jeans, his mother's blue-gray eyes, the ones I've never been able to look at for long, without feeling the particular ache of things that are gone and not gone at the same time. He looked like a man who hadn't slept right in a week and knew exactly why. "Nathaniel answered the door," Marcus said. "I'm looking for my father," and Nathaniel just said, "Come in," and stepped aside. Biscuit inspected Marcus's shoes with the same indifferent thoroughness she'd given mine. Marcus crouched down for a second and scratched behind her ears without really thinking about it, and then he looked up and saw me. "Dad." One word. Everything he had was in it. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. We sat there for a while in the kind of silence two people sit in when they're both trying to find the start of something true. "I told myself a story," he said finally, "that the hospital would sort it out, that you'd be fine, that it was temporary." He looked at his hands. "I blocked your number because Rachel asked me to. She said it would reset things, that it was healthier." It doesn't matter what she said. I picked up the phone. "That part's mine." "Yes," I said. "It is." I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes, I told him, not to wound him with it. As information, the kind he needed whole instead of in whatever softer version would have been easier for both of us to carry. Plastic bag on my lap, hands too unsteady to sign my own discharge papers. Your number ringing to nothing 3 times, then to nothing at all the 4th. I had $4 in my wallet and couldn't work the ATM. I didn't ask a nurse for help because I couldn't find a way to say out loud that my own son had blocked my number 4 days after they opened up my chest. His jaw worked, and he didn't say anything for a second. "A stranger sat down next to me," I said, picked up my bag, took me to his house, introduced me to his kids as the man who pulled him out of a fire almost 30 years ago, on a highway I'd driven past 1,000 times without thinking twice about it. I looked at my son. His children looked at me like I was worth knowing. I'd like it if mine did too. "I saw the picture," Marcus said. "Rachel showed it to me. She wasn't trying to be kind about it. She was making some other point, but I read the caption anyway." His voice went unsteady. It said the world balances its own books, and all I could think was, that should have been us, that should have been our table. "It still can be," I said. "I don't know how to fix things between you and Rachel. That's yours to sort out. What's between you and me is simpler. You're my son. I'm your father. That doesn't come with conditions. He looked at the floor. I blocked your number, he said again, like saying it twice might make it smaller. 4 days after your surgery. Yes, that's. He couldn't get the rest of it out. It is, I said. And I'm choosing to set it down. Not for your sake, because I'm 68, I just had my chest opened, and I'm sitting in a surgeon's living room because a stranger remembered me for almost 30 years. I don't have the years left to spend carrying something that heavy and that pointless. You understand what I'm telling you? Yeah, he said. I do. Good. Now go say hello to Nathaniel and Priya properly, and give that cat some attention. She's been very patient with both of us. Marcus laughed, cracked and real and a little wet around the edges, and Biscuit's tail started going immediately. The way animals decide laughter is always good news regardless of the reason behind it. He stayed until almost 8 that night. Drank 2 cups of coffee, let Eli explain the entire plot of some video game to him in more detail than any adult should have to absorb, and laughed at it twice, both times for real. When he left, Nathaniel shook his hand a beat longer than a regular handshake and said something to him I couldn't hear from where I was sitting. Marcus nodded. He hugged Priya on the porch, the kind of hug you give someone who needs holding more than they're willing to ask for. Then he drove off in his truck and Biscuit came and sat next to me at the window like she wanted to watch him go too. Good cat, I told her. Her tail moved once against the floor. I stayed with the Chos for almost 3 weeks, moved back into my house on the last Sunday of the month. My neighbor Ruth helped me carry my bag in, made a pot of tea, and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours while I told her the whole thing start to finish. She cried once and laughed twice. Doreen would be so proud of you, she said. Doreen would be proud of the Chos, I told her. And of you, Ruth said, for sitting still long enough to be found. Marcus calls every Sunday now. 40 minutes, sometimes longer. Real conversation, not the careful, managed exchanges of the last few years. He told me a few weeks back that he and Rachel started seeing someone, a counselor together, and he said it plainly, like a fact, not like an announcement he needed credit for. I told him I was glad to hear it. He asked how Nathaniel and Priya were doing. I told him they'd invited me for Thanksgiving, and that he and Rachel should come too if they wanted. He went quiet on the line for a second. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'd like that. There's a kind of decency that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't keep a ledger. It doesn't perform for anybody. It's just the plain habit of a person who decided a long time ago how he wanted to move through the world, and who keeps moving that way whether anybody's watching or not. I pulled a college kid out of a burning car on a highway in Ohio almost 30 years ago, and never told a living soul, not because I was being modest about it, but because it never once occurred to me that it needed telling. Somebody needed help. I stopped. I helped. I got back in my truck and finished my route. That was the whole of it, as far as I was concerned. What I couldn't have known was that it doesn't just end there. It sits somewhere in someone. In the specific memory of a 19-year-old who grew up to be a surgeon, who 28 years later saw a name on a chart and felt something in him go still and certain. Marcus blocked my number because his wife convinced him that my need for him was a kind of dependency, and that his always showing up was doing me harm instead of good. That particular twisting of the truth deserves to be named plainly, because it isn't rare, and it is genuinely dangerous. There's a real difference between a parent who demands too much, and a parent who is simply still present in your life, and a patient, capable person can blur that line until even a good son can't find it anymore. The answer to that isn't an argument. It isn't proving with words that you are not the thing you've been accused of being. The answer is just living, steadily, in a way that lines up with what you actually value, whether or not anyone happens to be looking. When Priya put that photograph up online, she wasn't building a case against anybody. She was just telling the truth about somebody, and that truth traveled through years of quiet distortion and a week of dead air on a cell phone, and told Marcus, more clearly than I ever could have on any phone call, exactly who his father was. The scales don't balance on a schedule anybody can predict, but they do balance. Sometimes it's a highway outside Ashtabula. Sometimes it's a hospital waiting room with a clock running 7 minutes slow. Sometimes it's a dinner table with a gray cat and an 11-year-old asking if you were scared, and a 13-year-old who says wild and means the highest thing she has to give. My hands don't shake anymore. The scar healed clean. The Sunday calls keep coming. That's enough.